Hello, all. The past several episodes, we have seen multiple functions of a petroleum refinery. Today, we are going to see some functions which have close relationship with respect to the supply chain of petroleum products. Today, we are going to talk about planning, scheduling, and blending, which are very critical aspects of the supply chain of the petroleum products. We are going to see how the petroleum refinery is different from other continuous process units and what are the complexities involved in it, and finally the planning, scheduling and blending in detail. As I said, petroleum refining is a complex business. It requires huge investment and a lot of fixed costs are involved, and it involves a lot of complicated chemical reactions, and the efficient use of refinery resources is important both for short term and long term profitability. And with respect to the supply chain of the petroleum products, the market for crude oil and petroleum products are very sensitive both to the political issues and disruptions and variations in demand and supply. For example, a war in the Gulf region is going to affect the global petroleum scenario, and it is going to affect the profitability as well as the operability of the refining industry. Crude oils and products are dependent on transport to their immediate and final destination. The final destination can be the immediate towns and cities located adjacent to the refinery, or it can be the next state, or even it can be far off where the products are transported to through shipping. So before getting into the supply chain aspect and the planning, scheduling and blending aspect, let's try to recap about the nature of crude oil and the classifications of crude oil. As discussed in the previous episodes, crude oil can be defined into two major categories. The first one is sour crude, where the sulfur presence is more than 0.5%. The second type of crude is known as sweet crude, where the sulfur content is below 0.5%. These aspects they are going to determine your refining processes. And also, let's try to understand a little more about the light crude and heavy crude. Most of the time, the sweet crudes are light in nature, and the sour crudes are heavy in nature. The light crude oil, liquid petroleum, that has a low density and flows freely at room temperature, while the heavy crude oil is highly viscous and that cannot easily flow to production wells under normal reservoir conditions. It can be visibly be seen to distinguish between a light crude oil and a heavy crude oil. The light crude oil has got a low viscosity, low specific gravity and a high API gravity due to the presence of high proportion of lighter hydrocarbon fractions. Whereas the heavy crude oil has been defined as any liquid petroleum with an API gravity less than 20-degree API. So as we discussed earlier, higher the API, lighter the crude oil, lower the API, heavier the crude oil. The light crude oil receives a higher price than heavy crude oil because it produces a higher percentage of gasoline and diesel fuel when converted into products, while the heavy crude oil are often priced at a discount to lighter ones. The increased viscosity and density also makes production more difficult. You require little complex processing in refinery to produce heavy crude oil, and because of that reason it is available at a lesser cost. Now let's try to understand this critical term known as opportunity crude. Using more expensive crude oil, that is lighter and sweeter crude oil, requires less refinery upgrading, but the supplies of light sweet crude oil are decreasing, and the differential price between heavier and more sour crude is increasing. So that is the lighter crudes are generally costlier and the heavier crudes are cheaper, and the difference in price between them they are increasing. Using cheaper, heavier crude oil means more investment in upgrading process. Cost and payback periods for refinery processing units must be weighed against anticipated crude oil cost and the projected differential between light and heavy crude oil price. Now let's try to understand how a refinery is designed to process a specific crude oil. A refiner's choice of crude oil will be influenced by the type of processing units at the refinery, and this is known as a refinery configuration. Refineries generally fall into three broad categories. Number one, topping plant. It is the most simplest units consisting of only a distillation unit. The second one is a cracking refinery that takes gas oil portion from the crude distillation unit to break it down further into gasoline and distillate components using catalyst, high temperature or pressure. And we have hybrid refineries where the refinery configuration falls between these two categories. Topping refinery, this is the most simplest refinery configuration, and it is designed to prepare feedstocks for petrochemical manufacture or for production of industrial fuels in remote oil production areas. It consists of tankages, a distillation unit, recovery facilities for gases and lighter hydrocarbons, and the necessary utility systems such as steam, power, and water treatment plants. So, this is a refinery where you just feed in the crude oil, and from the distillation column, you get the key products like kerosene, diesel, and the reduced crude oil. And there is no further secondary process involved in a refinery. So, the other types of refineries are fuel based refineries or lube based refineries. That means, in a fuel based refinery, all the products will be fuel or petrochemical feedstocks. Whereas in a lubricating refinery, you will be able to produce lubricant oils, and again, which involves complex process and also requires certain type of crude to be processed. Now let's try to understand a complex refinery. A complex refinery is one with a large number of high value conversion units. What does it actually mean? A complex refinery will have lot of secondary processing unit like a delayed coker unit, a fluid catalytic cracking unit, hydrocracker unit, so that all the residue are completely converted into valuable and useful products. A low complexity refinery has fewer and less value adding units. The complexity number for a refinery is an attempt to summarize a refinery's configuration in a single measure. This is done by assigning a complexity factor to each type of process unit and then weight averaging these values based on each unit's capacity related to the size of the distillation capacity at the refinery. In short, arriving the complexity number is the simplest way to spell out the complexity in a refinery. For example, in India, we have the Jamnagar refinery owned by Reliance. It is one of the most complex refineries in the world, which has got a complexity factor more than 21. So this means this refinery has put lot of money while constructing the refinery. It has got all the processing units like fluid catalytic cracker unit, hydrocracker unit, delayed coker unit, so that this refinery can process any type of crude oil. The refinery complexity factor. So actually this complexity factor is known as Nelson Complexity Index. It is a measure to compare the secondary conversion capacity of a petroleum refinery with the primary distillation capacity. The index provides an easy metric for quantifying and ranking the complexity of various refineries and units. To calculate the index, it is necessary to use the complexity factors which compare the cost of upgrading the units to the cost of crude distillation unit. A refinery which has got a high complexity number will be able to process any type of crude oil. So that means they can buy the cheapest crude oil or the opportunity crude so that their profitability can go up like anything. Now let's try to understand in depth about the key functions which we are planning to cover today, that is planning, scheduling and blending. Planning of refinery activities ranges from determining which crude oil types to acquire to which products that should be produced and sold in the market. That is what crude to buy and what kind of products to produce and that need to be sold out. Scheduling ranges from scheduling of crude oil, unloading and blending to blending of components to finished products. That means here the blending involves the crude oil blending as well as product blending. The planning and scheduling of crude oil operation in a refinery is critical task that can save refinery millions of dollars per year. So in fact, more than optimizing your refinery operations in terms of energy saving or arresting your leaks, more profitability can be achieved by proper planning, scheduling and blending. So the most smart refineries, they make huge profits by focusing these kind of activities. Crude oil varies significantly in compositions, product yields, properties, prices, and their acquisition accounts for a larger portion of the refinery's cost. A key issue for a refinery is therefore to identify and process optimal crude blends that maximize profit margins. Planning concerns the purchase of crude oil and the production and the sale of the products. Every aspect need to be planned with respect to the refining process. The use of correct and updated information is important because this will strongly affect the capability to identify market opportunities. The identification of the market opportunities is crucial for increased profitability. The capability of identifying market opportunities will be dependent on a company's ability, that is, given current condition, price, production decision, availability of crude, etc., etc., to determine its decision to buy, refine, and sell products. And the planning is to make such decisions, the company must consider already booked and planned production together with future prices. Planning is broadly done at multiple levels. Some of the broad activities with respect to planning are yearly budget plan, which is a very broad plan. The next one is quarterly midterm plan. So here the yearly plan is divided into quarterly plans. Then comes the monthly or short term plan. So here the quarterly plan is zoomed into monthly plans, and then weekly conversion feedstock plan, which is known as CFS plan. Here the monthly plan is zoomed into weekly plans. So once this plan is done with the help of the appropriate software, the final output is distributed to the operations team and all other stakeholders. And accordingly, the refinery will be consuming different kinds of crude oil and will be producing different kind of products, and based on that the products movements would be planned. To support the production planning decision making, refineries generally use commercially available software packages based on linear one periodic models that rely on constant yields. For example, PIMS is a popular software from Aspen Tech. Similarly, RPM is yet another package from Honeywell. These kind of solutions are globally widely used by the planners and schedulers to perform their daily tasks. Refinery planning and the refinery scheduling are generally performed sequentially, mainly due to the complexity of the refinery sub problems. Refinery scheduling problem is considered as three different sub problems due to the complexity involved in different refinery operations throughout the supply chain. Number one, the crude oil unloading from vessels or pipeline, it's transferred to the storage tanks and the charging schedule for each crude oil mixture to the distillation unit. So that is the very upstream segment of the refinery process, that is unloading the crude oil from the ships to the crude oil mandatory storage tanks and from there feeding to the refining units. Number two is production units scheduling, which include both fractionation and reaction processes. For example, within the refinery, some of the units will be operating in batch mode. For example, if you have a lube refinery, again for each unit we have to decide which unit will be processing which grade of lubricant oil. So this is where scheduling would be playing a very key role. Similarly, in the primary processing unit, there are refineries which produce kerosene and aviation turbine fuel in an alternate fashion. So, how long this refinery should on kerosene mode, how long the refinery should run on aviation turbine fuel mode, all this depending on your schedule. Then finally, the operations related to the blending, storage and the lifting of the final products, that is the last tail end portion of the refining activity. Selection of the crude oil, as I said, is very important depending on your refinery configuration. The main goal of the crude selection is to find a feasible crude blend that maximizes the profit of the planned production in the time horizon considered, taking into the account the current storage of crude oil at the refinery and the crude tankers scheduled to arrive at the refinery. So already we have discussed that every refinery has got enough storage tanks, which include the crude oil mandatory storage tanks. Depending on the availability of the space in the tank farm area and depending on the grade of products you are planning to produce, the crude oil selection will be done. If you have a very complex refinery which can process any type of crude oil, you have freedom to go and buy any type of crude oil. But most of the refineries in the world are designed to process specific set of crude oil, and then this selection of crude oil is playing a very vital role. A wrong crude mix can cost a refiner both in excess feedstock expense and the lost production revenue. For example, a refinery which can process medium to light crude oil, but suppose if the refinery buys a parcel of very heavy crude oil, it can never be processed. So what they can do is the heavy crude oil can be slightly blended or spiked with the regular crude oil, and this way this heavy crude oil can be consumed. So which is going to be a time consuming process. Find the right crude mix, the scheduler has to take into account both processing and economic considerations. So the operational issues as well as market issues need to be considered before planning and scheduling of the crude oil. After the selection of the crude oil, the crude procurement and the logistics departments have to secure the crude and schedule them for delivery. The monthly planning model, updated with more advanced crude blending simulations, is often used as a decision tool in order to determine the optimal crude oil mix. Many refineries have a complex facilities to blend the crude oil, either tank blending or line blending facility. Each refinery has built up its own history of how different crude oil have performed for their refinery in the past. The above information is then used in the crude blending simulation to achieve the optimal crude slate. There are simulation packages wherein when you specify the nature of crude oil, the software will predict what kind of products in terms of quality and quantity will be determined, but nothing like practical data. So you have a huge set of historical data, how different kinds of crude oil are processed and what kind of products are obtained. So there will be slight deviation between the software prediction and the actual data, and the planners and schedulers, they have to take both of them into consideration before arriving a decision. Scheduling of the crude oil. The objective of crude oil scheduling is to minimize the operational cost while meeting the target crude oil load to the crude distillation unit. For the scheduling, the scheduler assumes a fixed arrival of schedule for vessels, knowledge of the quantity and quality of the crude oil at the vessels, crude oil mix at the crude oil tanks, minimum and maximum flow rate in the pipeline, quality and quantity at the crude oil blends for the crude distillation units. So, all these aspects need to be considered before finalizing the schedule for crude oil. The objective of the crude oil scheduling is then to determine unloading schedule for each vessel. This includes the timing rates and which tank to transfer the parcel to transfer schedule of crude oil mix between storage and charging tanks if both are present in the refinery, inventory levels and crude oil concentration for all storage and charging tanks, charging schedule for each crude distillation unit, that is how much should be transferred to each crude distillation unit from each charging tank. For example, most of the refineries in the world have more than one crude distillation unit in their campus. To which refinery need to consume what type of crude oil, these things need to be planned and scheduled. For a general refinery, the planning specifies which crude or intermediate products to purchase and which product is to produce. The planning decisions are taken based on forecast of future demand, and usually planning takes into account a 2 or 3 months time horizon. The production plan is used in a rolling horizon setting to take into account updated information regarding refinery and markets. The decisions related to the scheduling of the refinery activities are generally performed on the basis of short time horizon, that is days or weeks, to determine the specific timings of the operation. The scheduling system considers a set of crude distillation units that produces specified intermediate products for storage in a set of intermediate tanks before they are mixed and sent to the pipeline to supply and consumer markets where there is a known demand. As I said, companies like Aspen Tech, Honeywell, they have leading proprietary software to handle the scheduling activities. So the benefits of such software are they properly reflect the sequence of events in the schedule, provide compatibility between long-term planning, that is 30 to 60 days, and short-term scheduling, 1 to 7 days, make it easy for the schedulers to coordinate with other departments like logistics and marketing departments, streamline the scheduling process, reduce demurrage cost by as much as $60,000 per day for a single super tanker, enables user to quickly resolve potential conflicts and manage tankage issues. Let's try to understand the third and important aspect known as blending. What is blending? The art of mixing the different components in a desired and controlled proportion, referred to as blending in a refinery. The objectives of blending are to maximize the refinery profit, to produce a variety of products as per market demand, produce products with the required specifications at the lowest cost, utilizes all intermediate refinery products to produce finished products in an optimized way. Important blending properties that are considered before performing blending activities are density, specific gravity, octane number, cetane number, vapor pressure, cloud point, flash point, pour point, viscosity, sulfur concentration. From where do we get all these details? So this is where quality control lab is playing a crucial role. So before blending, the samples are sent to lab, and based on the data from the quality control lab, then the blending activities are performed. The sources of gasoline blending. Gasoline blending in a refinery is an art. So it is the most complex way done. So the different sources of gasoline blending are straighten gasoline or CDU naphtha, coker gasoline, fluid catalytic cracker gasoline or thermal cracker gasoline, hydrocracker gasoline, reformate which comes from the platformer unit, alkylate that comes from the alkylation unit, polymerate, isomerate which comes from a isomerization unit, thermal cracker gasoline, aromatic concentrate and C4 plus gases. So whenever tank is full with the product samples are taken to lab, and based on that, the quality control lab gives a clean sheet for all the specifications. It generates the certificate of quality, and then the product is pumped out to the market. If not, if one single test fails, then it means off spec. It cannot be taken to market. So in that case, you have to do reblending or you have to do reprocessing. Both are time consuming activities. In some cases, you may have to reprocess where you cannot do the correction, course correction by reblending. So there is another concept known as quality giveaway. For example, if the octane number, minimum octane number for gasoline is 90, and even if it is 80, you cannot take it to market. You have to blend it with super grade gasoline and reach out to the 90 octane, then only it can be taken to market. There are some occasions where your octane number can go beyond the expectation, that is beyond the specification, 92 or 93, 95. This means you are giving excess quality to the customer, which is known as quality giveaway. Though the customer may be happy, this is a loss for the refinery, and it has to be minimized in most of the cases. And sometimes we give quality giveaway because we don't have time to do the reblending or reprocessing, because the tanker will be waiting, and if you are not able to pump the product to the tanker in time, huge money will be levied as a demurrage. In order to avoid demurrages, refineries compromise with the quality giveaway, but one has to do a calculation through the whether the loss is more through demurrage or whether the loss is more through the quality giveaway. This is where the optimal blending, scheduling, planning activity is going to play a crucial role. And because of these reasons, to avoid the surprises, a lot of online analysis are put in use in the refinery. These online analysis measure different kind of parameters, and the different kind of analyzers used in the blending are density analyzer, RVP analyzer, sulfur analyzer, gas chromatograph, octane analyzer, distillate analyzer, or moisture analyzer. So you get instant readings in real time, so that the last minute surprises are avoided. And today, online blending is quite common in refineries, because most of the refineries have sophisticated instrumentation and control system. Because of the limited storage space, many refineries have opted for online product blending. Inventories of blending stocks, together with the cost and physical property data, are maintained in the computer, and based on that, the linear programming models optimize the blending operations to produce the required product at the lowest cost. Online analyzers are installed to provide feedback control of blending streams and additives. Optimization programs like PIMS, for example, permit the computer to provide optimum blend to minimize cost and maximize profit. So today we have discussed at a high level about the key important activities with respect to the supply chain of the petroleum products. So before getting into that, we try to understand the nature of refining business, how complex it is, and how complex the supply chain are. Then at a high level, we discussed about planning, scheduling, and blending, and how these activities are interrelated with each other. Thank you for watching. So let's catch up with another episode in the next module. Thank you so much.